Hi everyone. Thank you for coming. So, as I was just discussing with the guys from Infinum, this is a presentation which we are doing in my own company. So this is the onboarding process which we start with. The point of this presentation is to get brief knowledge of what QA is, what we do. Some people still don't understand, even in the IT industry, where QA is, what does it do, and why is it needed. So this is a presentation which helps the people that start in my company to see where we are, what we do, and the whole overview of the IT world, let's say. So the first slide that I have is a very important slide which tells you what QA is. So at this point in my presentation, I usually ask, do you know the difference between QA and testing? And this is where you answer. Anyone wants to answer? Anyone? Okay, it's too soon in the presentation. So QA is a process. This is why I've selected these few lines of code saying, of text saying quality assurance, popularly known as QA, not Q&A, that's questions and answers. So this is QA, quality assurance, is defined as an activity to ensure that an organization is providing the best possible product or service to customer. QA focuses on improving the processes to deliver quality products to the customer, processes being the emphasis. QA is a whole process from beginning to the end. Testing is something that happens during that process where we check the requirements. And very importantly, what I add with this slide is that during QA, we are responsible for the quality of the product. We are responsible even though you don't necessarily know it per se. No one came to you and say, you're responsible, but in the back of your mind, you should know that you are responsible. And testing is not responsible. They have tasks, they tested, and that ended. So this is the main difference. I add a very interesting GIF here saying that IT is the new factory worker. So we sit in line, we're waiting for our piece to come to us, and we slide it on. So what was industrial revolution is now technical revolution, and we are all a part of it. How do we become a part of it is in the next slide. Please go to the next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Yes, it is. So this can be a little bit controversial. Let me start with that. So I take all the IT world and I place it into 4 categories. The first category is non-tech people, the business people, client customers, requirement guys, business analysts, product owners, project managers. I put them all into one category. The second category is designers and some of the front-end guys, not all, of course, they are developers, no offense, please. So the third group is the developers, round out all developers, we add them here, and then the fourth group is QA. I've made this just so I can easily show how the methodologies work. In no way I want to say that there are 4 places in the IT industry. Of course, there are tons of, even us, as we go into more in-depth testing, there more and more roles in the QA community, which is always welcomed and awesome, and we love that to happen even more. The next slide is actually the first methodology. The first IT methodology is the Waterfall methodology. Interestingly enough, this might come as a shock, but the Waterfall methodology in software was first introduced in 1956. So even though they say that there's a technical revolution happening in the 80s, keep in mind, from 1956, Waterfall methodology in software existed. So people were already creating software in one way or another. Waterfall methodology is, we all know it, we've heard of it, we know waterfall, what waterfall means, meaning water flows down the stairs from one stair to another. So the whole thing starts with a client, of course, coming to a business analyst or a company owner or whatnot, all non-tech people, as I said. And we go from here to the designers. They give out the info from what they got. The designers do their thing. They give it to the developers. Developers do their thing. Comes to us. We do our thing. And the result is, from our job, what we do. Anyone? A complete list of bugs and things that need to be fixed. The problem with Waterfall is that, as you can see, this is the last scale. Nothing comes after that. So we have identified the first problem of this methodology is that QA doesn't have where to report the issue. The second thing is that during that time, some of you might remember, we had to wait for several years for a new version to come, right? It didn't come as now every 2 weeks. It came after 2 years. So imagine you work on a project that was lasting n years, meaning, let's say, 2 years. And in those 2 years, we have the last 4 months. The developers stopped working 4 months ago. They most probably don't even remember what the project is about. How will they ever fix those problems, those bugs? How will we get to a point where we have a proper quality software? So they decided to start fixing things with the methodology. They decided that we need to go into something called a VModel, meaning we still, okay, this went a little bit bad, but don't worry. I'm going to inform everything. So we are still going the waterfall way, but now we have incorporated QA in every step so that we make sure that all the bugs are fixed when they're coming. With the VModel, I have to tell you, the most important thing about the VModel is that we still use it and we still prefer it, because this is how we go into depth with testing, and we know what happens in every single level. Thus, QA levels. We have different levels. We have the unit level, the integration level, system level, and acceptance level, of course. So whenever the project is at a point, for example, with the BAs, we have acceptance test design, where we do checking of the project's requirements, writing bugs even before they start creating them, right? So this is where the bug is the cheapest, only when it's in the document and no one touched it except the non-tech people and the QAs. If you start to search about how much bugs cost companies, there was one crazy info that one bug can cost up to $1 billion. So imagine catching that bug while in requirement phase. That's like a billion bucks saved, right? So we have the system test when it happens when the designers come in. This is a level where we test the system as a whole. and then we have the developer level, where we test the integration, how the functionalities communicate between each other. And then we have our level, which is the unit, the functionality. Here's what we test. With the VModel, the thing that it is introduced is the verification and the validation. These are the double V's, very important things, because one tells us what we expect, and the other one tells us what is in reality. And this is where our test cases come, and this is how they are created. Next thing, it's a very important part, but before I get to this, is VModel is a very costly methodology because it takes still a lot of time, and people always want to cut back on time. And additionally, QA communicates with everyone, not necessarily everyone communicates with each other. So they decided to create some kind of a going around the circle type of methodology, which is the iterative methodology. The iterative methodology solved the communication problems, but they left the timing problem, where we still have n number of years that we need to create a product. So they wanted to cut back on those years, and this is where I usually say a smartass decided to create something that's called Agile Methodology. Agile Methodology is a methodology where we sit down together with everyone involved in the project. I'm going to mention the 4 wise men again. And we sit down and we see what our project is going to look like at the end of the process. And we decide to divide all these functionalities and everything that we need into separate categories. First, what can't we live without? And then what is mostly needed after the what we can't live, and then follows. So they decided that if we gather all these functionalities, we can create a time frame where we can create all of these things and have them work properly. So they created something called a milestone. For example, if a project is 1 year in the making, they can divide it into 3 milestones. So every 4 months, there's going to be a release. That release is going to contain part of the software that is planned to be at the end. So milestone is 4 months. Now you have only 4 months to create this software. How do we make sure that we stay in those frames is the following thing. We have created sprints. Sprints are, now, when you sit down with the 4 wise men, you're going to decide if the sprint is going to be 1 week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks. Usually it's 2 weeks. And we decide what are we going to do in those 2 weeks. As you can see, we're sprinting. We're running, sprinting. What we do in a sprint? Sprint starts with a sprint planning. What's going to go in that sprint? Functionalities. If there are bugs, if it's advanced part of the project, you're going to have bugs. You're going to decide which bugs needs to be fixed immediately, which don't. You go into sprint planning and you decide what you're going to do in that sprint. Designers tell their thing, developers tell their thing, we do our thing. Usually it is decided during the 4 wise men period how QA is going to go. The example I have set here is what comes with the Agile Methodology books, meaning developers do their thing, then comes to us. Usually it's then 3 days of QA. We're not going to dive into what is expected because it's going to take a lot of time. So we go into the books Agile Methodology, saying that QA will only need 3 days to complete their testing. And in the end of the sprint, we go into retro meeting where we see what happened before, what's good, what's bad, what can be improved. Demo, this is the very important meeting that we have in the Agile. This is how everyone is aware, including the client, what is happening with the project. And this is what keeps the project in check and in time so that we can hit our milestone. Now, little thing about QA in Agile. QA was not, Agile was supposed to remove QA as a profession. The thing that they didn't get is that what they were planning was a utopia, meaning developers know exactly what to do, know exactly what to test, and they have bigger knowledge of how to write optimized code, and they will do everything perfectly. We all know that that's not the case, and that's why we are still here. And after a few years, there was a book saying Agile testing. Agile testing will promote few things. One is that we still keep this type of arrangement where we implement automation tests as well, so that during their development part, we can write automated tests from what we have done for the previous sprint, and then there's going to be 3 days where QA only test features, and that's fine. There's another option where they divide the deployments so that you can get periodically more things to test, which is the best way possible. And then there are other agile testing methodologies where they add a sprint for QA and so on and so on. Now, I'm going to talk about the QA process. As you already understood, we are into every methodology, meaning that as developers are needed, QA is needed if you would like to have a quality code, quality project, which I don't believe that there's anyone that doesn't want that. What do we do to make sure that the software is in quality standards? Well, firstly, what we have to do is put on a lot of hats. So, if you're working on a project for medicine, you have to understand what the end user will do in order for you to be able to make sure that the software that was created for your clients. So this is a very funny story. We have a chemistry project. And one time when a guy from my company started working on this project, I came in the office and he had a book, the whole monitor saying chemistry for dummies, meaning you have to understand what the chemists need. You are not going to become a chemist, let's face it. But you need to understand what they need in order for you to be able to test the software, right? So we have to put on a lot of hats. And if we don't do a proper research, everything goes down. Research, it's not only for what people do with your software. The other part of research is you have to be able to research what is needed from you. Also, what the developers are doing on your project. You need to question what kind of framework is it used, what kind of language, so that you can anticipate and expect the bugs as they are developing the software. So research is a very crucial part and something that I always say. Whenever we hit a wall, I said, okay, back to the drawing board, let's do research. After research, we know what is expected of us. We have researched the documentation. We have created the bugs from the documentation, and those have been cleared. Now we go ahead to start creating our test documentation. Our test documentation includes test plan, and then creating test suites, which will contain test cases, and of course, very importantly, start creating test data. Because, as we have all seen, there are some people that have crazy thoughts about test data. From blah, 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 from blah, blah, blah to whatnot, they have a lot of stuff. This is a funny story that I usually tell, is that for one of my employers, as I've been working with several of them, there was a guy, he was a sales guy, so he decided to show the system to his clients. So the test data that was used there, it had naked chicks, let's say, just little tiny naked chicks, and then some very disturbing text. So imagine going to a client's meeting, and then there's a booty on the screen. You will most probably get fired. So this is what happened to the guy. He got fired just because of not proper test data. This is why we have to make sure that we are always using test data and we have the proper data. Additionally, if you're testing all the time with blah, 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 gra, 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 you're going to see a lot of nonsense in your lists after a month, right? So these are very important stuff that we need to take care in the QA process, and then we go into execution. We have several types of testing, of course, the levels are there, and you have to know your levels. And then whatever you need to do to execute the code, you execute the code. After that, we go into the cycles, right? We're running like a hamster in an agile or an iterative methodology, and we retest everything that we found, and we are doing regression testing. Of course, we all know what the regression testing is. We do functional testing together with everything that happens, system test, and everything that comes with the test related to changes, right? At the end, we do the reports, whatever reports you need. There are several. Most widely used are exit and acceptance reports. And with that, we conclude our process. Of course, this is not happening once. You go round and round in circles with that, and it is what it is. Now, that could close my presentation. I'm on time. Yes. Any questions? No questions? Then I did a good job. Thank you, everybody. You sure? You sure? Going once, going twice?
Oh, no. That's my part. You actually stole this also from me.
I'm so sorry.
Just to open up, you mentioned several methodologies here. And first of all, thanks for the good historical overview. I think most of us here probably did some part of QA or QA, also testers, etc. And we do our work, but I don't think we usually actually think about the theory and historical overview of our job. But maybe one question from my side would be, out of these three methodologies that you mentioned, which one would you say that's the best? Or the one that maybe your
That's a sneaky question.
Your personal favorite, what would you say?
As I said, I'm an owner. So I'm torn between being a good QA and then making money, right? So making money part screams agile, even though, as you learned from my tone, I'm not a huge fan of it. Although I think that if there are changes to that methodology that has QA in mind, because I don't think that today's agile methodology has QA in mind, but if they do, I would choose agile over VModel. But as it happens, if VModel is practiced in a more agile way, I think that the VModel is going to be the best methodology. So to answer your question shortly, depending on the project, whatever comes on our doorstep, we encourage the VModel or the agile. Now, I'm going to tell you a secret. Sometimes we encourage the waterfall as well. Yes, because when it's a website and takes a month, it's just simpler that way than to chase all the components that are being sent in Drupal, imagine. So yeah, depending on the project, you're going to choose one or the other. I know I'm giving a political answer here, but I would say VModel.
Okay, that's fair. You said we spoken before the presentation. Basically, you are a owner of a QA agency, I would say.
Yep.
That's the correct way to describe it. There's 15 of you. What would you say that most of your projects are working on? Like, is that from a owner perspective, you would want to have Agile on as many projects as possible because you could cache that in more easily than others. But what would be your, like, what do you mostly use? And I get it's depending on the project, but average, what would you say what's the most widely used methodology?
Most widely used methodology is Agile. By far, hands down, Agile. The interesting part is that they have their own Agile and none of them have the same Agile. I think it's just a thing that happens in our industry at the moment because it's not standardized. So this is a problem, of course, but we roll with the dice. But we have a legacy code with one of our clients, and we use VModel.
Well, some would say that Agile not being the same or standardized everywhere is being Agile. But yeah,
that's I need the panther again, the cheetah.
In the meantime, anyone got any comments, questions?
I have one question about the Agile methodology. For example, we have a lot of sprint. Do you test only the features for the current sprint? Because the developers can reuse some code and break something that worked before, I don't know, 2 sprints ago.
Yeah, so this is something that happens in our company as well, and usually people get discouraged by this because Agile does not allow you to do a proper regression, proper manual regression, but you still have to do it, right? Yeah. So what we usually do is we bend the system. We create some scripts that we don't care about too much. We don't make them pretty, and we don't continue to build on them, but they help, especially like sanity checks and stuff like that. But then we divide our time in order for us to be able to do regression on sections each sprint, depending on the project. Some projects, like the whole regression is 3 days, so yay, right? But then we have another project which it's 6 months regression, right? So you have to be wary of what you're doing. The thing the most important thing is that don't be discouraged. Try to do as much as you can, but you can only do so much, right? So either voice your opinion, say that, look, we have all these bugs which we knew that they were reported, and of course, I always recommend finding those reported bugs and showing them this is the bug, but because you merged only to a branch, you didn't merge to a master, now it's reappearing. You go ahead and you voice that so that they maybe even get their deployment schedule better rather than just falling everything to QA. Because developers can do testing as well.
And I have here a comment about this, maybe Simona will agree, because as well some of the theory of Agile, which is idealistic, again, utopia Agile, is to include a regression testing inside the sprint. So you have included that before 2 sprints, or 1 sprint at least behind, that you should do a regression for the things done in the previous sprint. So this should be somehow taken in consideration when you're in this current sprint to test a little bit regression of the previous sprint. And if you do like this in all the next sprints, testing a little bit from the previous, so you will be somehow aware maybe, which
Yes.
I agree with you that you said that maybe regression will take a little bit too long time, but then is when you include automation.
Yes, of course. I already said that you can divide it into sections and you can test each sprint part of the regression. The problem that can occur here, and I think that that's what he's referring to, is that when you do that regression, and then they do a build, and there is one functionality that shares the same method that they created a change for another place, and then and it's gonna.
But that's expected.
Yeah, but then you have a bug.
And you should report it as well. Because of that, you're doing a regression and you're taking in consideration.
Yes.
It's time consuming, but it's a must, especially in that.
Of course, of course.
And yeah. And about again, one other comment which I have, it is like Simona is coming from like an owner place, but before that, of course, she was part of a company. And when you're working in an agile companies, there is still the fight for the QA place on that companies. And I agree completely with what you said, that especially if you're working agile and in agile company, it's super difficult to make clear why you need 5 days and not 3 days. And yes, that's still a struggle. And I agree that the VModels here is very much where it should be combined with this agile.
Yeah, correct. Questions? Anyone? Another one?
Anyone else?
I have a comment about what you said last thing. Of course, we can have a bug if we do not do some regression, but we are in the same team with the developers. We can always check their pull request. We can always communicate with them and see where they are making change. So we will not make full regression, but we can check only those places where we are expecting to. So our regression from 3 days ago will be still valid. We just need to do like 5 to 10 more tests and we can check the other results.
Yes, this all comes from Agile. Cueing the cheetah.
Thank you. Welcome. Okay, now I will say going once, going twice. Okay, so then let's give one more applause to Simona.
Thank you, everybody.